There are many dark pages in the history of the Third Reich that still cause controversy among historians, researchers, and journalists. One of the most intriguing topics remains the question of whether Adolf Hitler used doubles for public speeches, trips, and meetings. This version has repeatedly appeared in memoirs, in declassified documents of the Allies, and in the testimonies of contemporaries. This question is not so simple, because we are talking not only about a possible substitution of identity, but also about a large-scale operation to create the image of a leader to whom a huge country was subordinated. Why doubles of the Führer could actually be needed, who exactly claimed this role, and how convincingly it was possible to hide the truth from millions of people. This is worth telling in as much detail as possible. From the first years of Hitler's power, his security became one of the key tasks. The Reich Chancellery and the Security Service understood that the risk of assassination attempts was extremely high. As early as 1933, the first attempts to organize assassinations were made, and later the conspiracies became more frequent and sophisticated. It is in this context that the version appears that Hitler's entourage used doubles. In Germany at that time, there was a whole network of actor mimickers who earned money by copying the gait, gestures, and voice of the leader. But among them, several figures stood out, who were called official doubles. One of these was a man named Gustav Wöller. His name appears in British and Soviet archives, although there is no definitive evidence of his existence and activities. According to a number of sources, Wöller was found by the SS before the war and underwent special training. He was taught to repeat facial expressions, master the manner of speech, and even change his gait depending on the situation. According to some information, it was Wöller who could appear at times when there was a risk of an assassination attempt, or when the real Hitler physically did not have time to attend several events in a row. It is significant that photographs of this man, which occasionally appear in archives, demonstrate a striking resemblance. A narrow nose, a characteristic fringe, and even a mustache line repeated the image of the Führer. Rumors claimed that, in some cases, the public actually saw not the real Hitler, but his double. Another alleged double is an Austrian waiter, Andreas Kuhn. His story is less well documented, but references can be found in the memoirs of former SS officers. Kuhn was allegedly used at the beginning of the war for secondary events, where Hitler was only required to demonstrate an image, but not to make decisions. Such outings helped to create the impression that the leader of Germany was omnipresent, that he was able to simultaneously control the front, the capital, and party congresses. In the conditions of growing chaos, this strategy worked to support the myth of the Führer's superhuman energy. The psychological aspect is especially interesting. Many contemporaries noted that by the end of the 1930s, the real Hitler increasingly looked tired, irritable, and subject to sudden mood swings. His health was rapidly deteriorating. Doctors recorded trembling hands, insomnia, and nervous breakdowns. At the same time, official propaganda was obliged to convey the image of an invincible and self-confident leader. This is where doubles could come into play. They allowed signs of weakness to be hidden. For example, at ceremonial events where the Führer was only required to silently greet the troops or smile in public, a double could perform, while the real Hitler was under the supervision of doctors at that time. The archives of the Allies also provide interesting details. British intelligence, MI5 in its reports, indicated the possibility of the Führer having security doubles. In particular, there is a mention that after the failed assassination attempt in July 1944, the British considered the version. The person shown in the first days after the explosion could not have been Hitler himself, but a carefully trained double. The suspicion arose due to the fact that the leader's appearance in photographs and in the newsreel was slightly different. The shape of the nose and the line of the chin looked less clear. For military intelligence, such details could mean a lot. An equally intriguing version was also promoted by the Soviet authorities. The NKVD archives contain documents that consider the hypothesis of using doubles. One of the employees directly wrote that, in the conditions of constant conspiracies, the SS was obliged to have reserve figures capable of replacing Hitler in public. In the post-war years, there were even rumors in the USSR that one of these doubles was captured by the Red Army and secretly interrogated. However, direct evidence was never presented, which left room for speculation. Doubts are also reinforced by Hitler's own behavior. His paranoia, well known to his contemporaries, suggested that he might have approved the idea of using doubles. The leader of the Third Reich was afraid of assassination attempts and carefully controlled his entourage. He rarely trusted even his closest officers, constantly changed his travel routes, and his guards developed complex disinformation schemes. In this atmosphere, it would have been logical to resort to the substitution method. If the public saw a person similar to Hitler, and potential conspirators did not know for sure where the real leader was, this would increase the chances of survival. There is another version. Some of the stories about doubles could have been launched by Nazi propaganda itself. For supporters inside Germany, the idea that their leader had replacements only strengthened the myth of invincibility. For enemies, this was bound to cause doubts and confusion. Even rumors about doubles could have worked as a psychological weapon. After all, if the enemy doesn't know who to aim at, he becomes less confident of success. The final chapter of this story is connected with the last days of the war. When the Red Army stormed Berlin, an atmosphere of chaos and doom reigned in Hitler's bunker. Eyewitnesses claimed that until the end of April 1945, none of those close to him were sure that it was the real Hitler who remained in the dungeon. Some soldiers even speculated that the real Führer had long since left the capital, and the double had been left in the bunker. These rumors were fueled by the circumstances of the dictator's death. Since the bodies were partially burned, researchers were left with questions. Did the Soviet troops really find the remains of Hitler himself or his double? The official versions of the NKVD claimed that it was him, but doubts remained, which still gives rise to new theories. As a result, the story of Hitler's doubles remains a mystery in which truth and myths are intertwined. On the one hand, there is no irrefutable evidence that stand-ins were used systematically. On the other hand, there is too much circumstantial evidence indicating that such a practice could have existed. In the conditions of war, constant assassination attempts, and the deteriorating health of the leader, this step seemed quite logical. The question of who exactly came out to the people at different moments in the history of the Third Reich remains without a definitive answer. But it is precisely this ambiguity that makes the topic so fascinating. After all, behind the image of one person, there could be a whole group of people, each of whom played their own role in the great tragedy of the 20th century.